Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Amanda Ziadeh with WashingtonExec, and today I'm joined by Chief Information Security Officers from industry to discuss the White House's most recent National Cybersecurity Strategy, which was released on March 2nd. So in this session, we'll get a brief overview of the strategy and its main points. Our CISOs will share their reactions and industry's role in executing the strategy and more. So I'll quickly start by introducing our CISOs. With us today is J.R. Williamson, CISO for Leidos. We have Chris Hughes, CISO and co-founder of Aquia, and Michael Baker, IT CISO for DXC Technology. Thank you all for joining us today. So Chris, let's start with you. Can you give us an overview of the strategy and the main tenets included?
Yeah, definitely. So the strategy is kind of oriented around 5 overarching pillars, and I'll go through those each, one by one. First up is going to be defending critical infrastructure, and it focuses on some key things like federal, civilian, executive branch agencies, but also critical infrastructure sectors as defined by DHS and CISA and so on. And it also introduces a concept of kind of harmonizing existing federal and regulatory aspects of cybersecurity for industry. And then second up is disrupting and dismantling threat actors. So this one's focused on, national adversaries like China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, some of their capabilities and their advanced confidence when it comes to cyberspace, for example, and kind of the defending forward, for lack of a better way to put it. Third up on the pillars is going to be shaping market forces to drive security and resilience. I'll say this one got definitely the most attention among the industry, which we'll dive into soon, I'm sure. But this one's, kind of focused on realigning market incentives to, get software producers, software vendors, technology companies to prioritize cybersecurity. The fourth up is going to be investing in a resilient future. This one focuses on the pervasiveness of technology and software, and how as a society we need to invest in a secure future when it comes to technology. And then last up of the 5 is forging international partnerships to pursue shared goals. This one's kind of a recognition that we can't do this on our own. We need our international partners to be successful on this front. And all of these are kind of oriented around 2 fundamental shifts as they lay out in the strategy, which is rebalancing the responsibility to defend cyberspace. And we'll talk about that, kind of like I said, encouraging and even holding accountable software and technology vendors for responsibility that they have in cyberspace versus the end user, the average citizen, that kind of a thing. And then ultimately, the second one is realigning incentives to favor long-term investments. So trying to shift from that short-term thinking, speed to market, market share, that kind of a thing, and get focused back on long-term impacts and consequences of some of these decisions.
Thanks, Chris. So, JR, can you give us a brief history of how this came about? How was the defense industrial base and the GovCon industry engaged through the creation of the strategy?
Yeah, happy to. Thank you. So in April of last year, Rob Nackey, who works for Chris Inglis and was really in charge of developing the National Cybersecurity Strategy this time around, reached out to the Internet Security Alliance and other industry groups to get their input and feedback on really the key issues that should be addressed in the upcoming document. Some of you are probably familiar with the Internet Security Alliance. We're a trade association focusing on cybersecurity policy and governance for the nation. In fact, I'm the chairman of the board. I've been with the Internet Security Alliance for about 12 years. Larry Clinton is our president, former staffer, in Congress. And this is really where we work to really sort of shape national security policy, around cyber. So Rob reached out to us. He had recently read a book that we had just published called Cybersecurity for Business. Organization-wide strategies for ensuring cyber risk is not just an IT issue. And I think was very impressed with the issues that we raised, as well as some of our recommended solutions. And he really wanted to incorporate some of those themes into the body of work that he was accountable for. So what happened next is, we got invited to the White House for the kickoff and to engage at that summit that occurred last year, and have been engaged ever since. Which we really appreciated the opportunity to have a voice in this. And through the member companies and organizations, part of ISA, we work to really sort of shape some of those key themes. And some of those issues that we brought forward, you already heard a little bit from Chris on, one in particular is around incentives. So that's been a key theme over our 20 plus year existence at ISA, is the getting focused really on changing those behavioral outcomes by incentivizing industry and workforce versus just regulating to get to a place where we can keep our nation safe. So that was a huge one for us. And I think, as you saw, that came out very loud and clear in the resulting artifact. Another key thing we were focusing on is cyber workforce development, including the stand-up of a National Cybersecurity Academy program to really rapidly focus on developing the cyber warriors that we need across both government and industry, and doing so really to burn down that multi-million number of backlog that we have in cyber resources that has been a big pain for our industry for quite some time, as well as our nation. And another key thing we were advocating for was really eliminating that sort of 4-year college degree requirement that exists on most U.S. government contracts. We believe in the cyber space we can develop much more quickly, talent necessary to address cybersecurity issues by just completely eliminating that requirement. And not that we're saying that 4-year college degrees are bad; they're not. They're fantastic. But when we think about the capabilities and the skills that we need for cyber, we feel like we can develop those skills and much more quickly than waiting for 4-year cycles to produce people there. So that was a huge one for us. Another key one is really sort of, whole of government. So take a view that allows us to streamline the many cyber regulations that exist out there today across all the various government entities that have authorities to govern their environment, and then equally ensure that any new regulation that comes out of the strategy here actually go through like an OMB process to ensure that there's no conflict or overlap with existing requirements. I mean, we feel very strongly that, at the end of the day, not only do we want them harmonized and streamlined, things like CMMC that we've talked about. I mean, why do we need, different regulations across the various entities? Let's just agree on one and use that to raise all the boats up, to these minimum standards. But equally important, there should be a cost benefit associated, with each of these things. Anytime we're going to go to regulate, we need to make sure there's going to be value in doing that. And anything that doesn't quite pass that test should just be eliminated, or at a minimum, reformed. So that's huge. We also believe very strongly that we need to increase funding for law enforcement, so that we can sort of go after, these organizations and impose cost and consequence, for those that would seek to do our nation harm. And then lastly, just ensure that there's a commitment, across the government sector risk management agencies to develop implementation plans in coordination with industry. There's a whole model around industry sector coordinating councils that's in place. And so we're asking just to ensure those two things line up, so that as we go forward and actually put funding and teeth behind some of the really great ideas that came out of the strategy, that we get those things aligned and coordinated.
All right, wonderful. Thanks for sharing, JR. So, Mike, this is an ambitious strategy. What are some things that you're excited about that they got right, and perhaps some things that it's missing?
I would say thanks again. I would probably more excited with this document, and listening to JR talk about how it was formed and the partnership in which it was formed and kind of that pragmatic approach gets me even more excited. But when I read through it, I was actually struck by the tone, the words, and the semantics that were used in the document and the artifact. We were hit with a lot of some of the same stuff. We doubling down on more threat intel, doubling down on public-private partnerships, right? Trying to break those barriers down so that we can share information quicker and more effectively. There is another, advocation for zero trust, rolling those policies and those standards out across federal agencies, making it easier to consume what that means. When you look at a DXC technology where I work or where my colleagues work, we're really looking for zero trust and how to make it real. And I think this was another, with the executive order, a really good, again, a stamp on zero trust as the strategy to move us into the future. And again, JR mentioned kind of the standardization of cyber requirements. We've been talking about this for a while, right? all of us in the CMMC world have said we just want one standard to move us forward. We want to commit to that standard. We want to start putting the investment in. So those are things that I think that were doubled down on, rightfully so. The one that was amazing to see doubled down on is in my friend Chris Hughes' realm here as a thought leader in the software space, was again the commitment to a software bill of materials, the commitment to secure coding standards and secure development standards. But when you look at the sections that Chris went down, you look at section 1, things that jumped out at me in section 1 was they had a section on affordability. This is something that we've talked about in industry in the CMMC world for a long time. How are we going to make this affordable? As JR mentioned, raising all boats, right? We need to make it affordable for smaller businesses, whether you're in the defense industrial base or you service other government agencies or you're just in industry at large. So I thought that was really good and surprising and a welcome addition to the strategy. When you look at section 2, the word disruption, as Chris mentioned, that's a huge word, right? Disruption activities, speaking to the economics or disrupting the economics of cyber attacks, whether it's ransomware or other sorts of attacks out there. Holding our critical infrastructure providers to a higher standard, right? That's a huge shift. And as Chris mentioned, section 3, the theme there, accountability, right? I think we've been dancing around this as an industry for a really long time. To see it in words is quite amazing, right? Accountability for the data sets you take custody of. JR, Chris, and I live this every day in protecting our companies, right? But they expanded that notion across the board. And I think the heavy hitter here is the liability, the use of the word liability for releasing insecure products, right? The use of the word duty of care as it relates to releasing vulnerable products. Validating open source libraries, the SBOM libraries, and really holding vendors and partners accountable for that. Calling out the False Claims Act in 3.5, I think was a welcome thing, right? This is not a check the box activity. You have to attest to your program and stand by it. And then again, as Chris mentioned, the word investment in section 4 really rang true to me, right? Investing in things like post-quantum, right? What do digital identities look like in the future, right? Investing in our workforce and our people, closing that gap, as JR mentioned. I think it hit it right on the head. And reading through it, it's something that really I was very excited to see put in place. My only question is, how do we implement this, right? We've been through the CMMC world. We've been through these sorts of compliance regimes and requirements. We've been living in the post-executive order world for over a year, which introduced SBOM and Zero Trust as kind of those standards to take us forward. I just asked, what's next, right? How do we get this from strategy to implementation? But those are my first impressions, Amanda.
Awesome. So what do we think is next, Chris? What do you think is next in the strategy?
Yeah, as Mike points out, and JR highlighted as well, it's an incredibly ambitious, strategy, essentially covering a broad area of topics. I think next is kind of fleshing out some of these topics further in terms of harmonization. Like, how do we harmonize the existing and emerging, regulatory or cyber frameworks while still accounting for the uniqueness of each of the sectors and entities that are kind of falling underneath that purview? Same thing on the liability front. How do we define what is secure, and where do we draw the line of responsibility between a software supplier and a software consumer, for example? And then also we didn't touch on this, but it introduces the concept of safe harbor for organizations that, do their due diligence and, do care, for example, around secure products. How do we define secure, and then how do we determine if they've done their due diligence and their due care? Who's going to evaluate that? Who's going to assess that and make the determination? And then ultimately, as the workforce piece, I think I wanted to highlight this from JR too. I teach at a couple different universities, and I think this is big of eliminating the degree factor, is that, cyber moves very fast, faster than many degree programs, unfortunately. And we have a massive, 3.5 million shortfall of cyber professionals based on organizations like ISC Square, for example. So we need to allow people into the industry to tackle these challenges and expand our community, basically. And I think, moving forward, it's just trying to flush some of these things out. How do we really get some teeth behind these? How do we make progress on this and kind of appease all the parties involved to the extent possible?
Yeah, if I can jump in to add to that, I think, this perpetuates the age-old question in terms of like, the tug of war a little bit here. This document in of itself on a couple sections is all about collaboration and coming together and breaking down barriers, but then doubles down on liability and those sorts of items that tend to slow down some of our programs. So I'm really interested to see how this works out in that respect. I'm a true fan of both. We need both, right? We need accountability. We need liability. We need to hold people to a standard to deliver secure products. But at the same time, we also need to collaborate more effectively with open boundaries so that we can react quicker to the threat actor. So seeing that come about is going to be something that I'm looking forward to and frankly, excited to participate in.
Awesome. And JR, any final thoughts from you as well?
I agree with all that. It was well said, guys. Look, the next steps are to just fund the initiatives. I mean, these are the right things to do. And I think there's very broad, positive response for the strategy because it was, like you said, Chris, very comprehensive. It covered sort of the landscape of the issues. And I think Chris Inglis and his team get credit for really engaging, industry and other government entities in the formation, of the strategy. So I think that's good. But how we make it real? We fund it. We get alignment on these things and we fund these initiatives and we get it done. And I think that's good. I mean, President Biden just proposed, a budget. There's funding coming. A lot of this will get coordinated back through Homeland Security and CISA. And so Jen Easterly and Eric Friedman and that team are going to get, the resources really. That's what's in the proposal to actually go make many of these strategies become real. What we don't want to do, I mean, the cyber solarium was also sort of a watershed moment here. If you go back a few years, they came out with a lot of really great ideas, but we really struggled with actually funding all of those ideas and getting sort of this whole of government view in place so that we could actually go make the changes. Ironically, one of the changes coming out of the Solarium Commission was the creation of the NCD, actually getting Chris Inglis in place, to actually put focus and attention here. And I think we could say that was a win because that did get funded. His team did come together and they've produced a really great artifact for us to rally around. And hopefully that's what it will be. It'll become this artifact that we can all sort of rally around in order to make positive change. I tell you that the concept of rebalancing that was hallmarked here, and Mike, you talked about it, is also an important one on two levels, maybe three. But one level is that national level cyber issues that we're facing here are not uniquely just problems for our government to solve alone. Industry and citizens need to play their part too. However, just shifting the cost to industry isn't going to solve the problem either. The strategy sort of seems to suggest some sort of protection scheme for smaller companies and maybe shifting more of this liability or accountability to the larger organizations. But look, can any of us even stand up and compete against nation state adversaries alone, like China, Russia, or Iran, just by ourselves? So this approach, I think, really needs to be much more risk-based and definitely a much more partnership orientation among both government and industry. And we need to focus in on the highest areas of pain, several which were called out quite nicely in the strategy, like ransomware and the effects that's having both on our economy as well as disrupting citizen services. And I think that's a positive thing. So just continue to invest in these right areas, both in government and in industry, as I think the way we'd like to do it. And then lastly, I would just say that I'd like to see just a little bit more focus on cyber workforce development. I think there was a bunch of proposals that came through. We didn't quite get them all the way through into the document as we look to harmonize a bit across the various stakeholders here. But that's one that I'd be very much interested in, particularly around our National Cybersecurity Academy as a way of just driving just faster, speed really into developing cyber talent to put into these areas of gaps, because the funding itself might help with systems, but we still need people and educated, capable people to execute on these strategies.
Yeah, there certainly seems to be much more to talk about and discuss as it relates to the strategy. So stay tuned for more opportunities to hear from our industry experts and CISOs and GovCon about how the strategy is implemented and moves forward. So thank you all for joining us today and helping us unpack the strategy, its intent and formation, and we look forward to catching up soon.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, guys.